Good afternoon, and welcome to the Alper Initiative for Washington Art and the American University Museum at the Katzlin Art Center. We are going to have a conversation about Border Wall, our now virtual exhibition of the photography of Allan Gerson. Every 4 years, the museum dedicates its space to presenting artists in the run-up to presidential elections who address some of the most contested issues facing voters. Our intention is to educate and provoke engagement in our civic life as we highlight the work of artists in our community. This year's election series features 6 exhibitions and is entitled Contested Space. 2 exhibitions in this series are concerned with the weaponization of immigration policies. Mikre Pita's art addresses the environmental and human impact of Chinese immigration into the Uyghur territory. Drawing upon her ancestry, she contemplates the loss of Uyghur cultural identity and the ongoing worldwide refugee crisis. The other artist, closer to home, is photographer and human rights attorney Allan Gerson. His mural-sized photographs make us witnesses to the perilous journey of individuals in Mexico dreaming of life on the other side of the US border, risking everything to cross over. You can see these exhibitions online by going to our website and clicking on our Museum at Home link. There is a printed catalog as well as an electronic catalog, which will be emailed to those who registered for this talk. After our conversation, the panelists will field questions you can submit during the course of the talk in the question box. Jennifer Sakai curated the exhibition. She's a photographer, professor, and curator who resides in Washington, D.C. She received her MFA from Virginia Commonwealth University in the fine art photography. This is the second exhibition she's curated for the American University Museum. The first was 2 years ago, The Gifts of Tony Podesta. Ms. Sakai has worked on exhibitions for Transformer Gallery, IMF, World Bank Photographic Society, Exposed DC, and the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Art. Also with us is David Henry Gerson. He's Allan Gerson's son. He is a filmmaker whose work has won prizes from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the Sundance Film Festival, and has been acquired by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. He's a graduate of Columbia University and the American Film Institute, and recipient of the AFI Richard P. Rogers Award for Creative Excellence. I'd like to turn over the screen to Jennifer Sakai now. Thank you very much for working with us again, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jack. It's been a delight, and thank you, Katzlin, for providing this platform for us to share the work of Allan Gerson and the show I know everyone put a lot of time and love into. I thought I would begin today by just giving a little bit of background about Mexican border wall work, things that led to Gerson's body of work, and also a little bit about the history of immigrant art. I'm going to share a screen with you. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about my beginning and connection with Allan Gerson on the show. When we met, we both had a love of abstraction and of color photography, and that was really the starting point of our relationship. For those that don't know, Gerson himself was an immigrant coming here in 1950 with his family under an assumed identity, actually false papers. It's a very compelling story, which he details in his autobiography and in an article for the Washington Post. But he speaks of how he calls himself the dreamer, and that if not for a sympathetic judge and legal system, he felt like his life could have turned out very differently. And I think this experience was really pivotal to Gerson, both in his future as a human rights attorney, but also artistically, and some of the explorations that he made artistically. One of the delights of working on the show was the studio visits I had with Allan when we started, and these long conversations in his studio as we poured through his work. One of the first times I visited his studio, I had just returned from New York, and I had seen the show Then They Came for Me, which was about the relocation of Japanese Americans during World War II. And so we spoke a little bit, particularly about the photography. We're looking now at some work by Dorothea Lange, who moved from the FSA, the Farm Security Administration photographs, to the WRA, the war relocation. Ansel Adams was another photographer that worked on this project, but Dorothea Lange was really there from the beginning. Her images, I really feel, humanize the experience and connect to some of the images and things we see with Border Wall later. It's about the experience of dehumanization, what that looks like in various forms. Two artists I just wanted to touch on. Chizuko Shigata was a California artist and writer who was interned at Poston Camp in Arizona, where coincidentally my own family was also interned. She produced a series of watercolors while she was in camp when she was a child to sort of deal with the experience. And I think this is an interesting touchstone to some of the murals in that these artistic expressions are not only a way of coping, but it's a way of expressing yourself. You can have sort of your rights denied and be in a perilous situation, but you really can't take away the artistic form. This was later published into a book of her childhood watercolor and a memoir. This is Mine Okabu, and she was interned at Topaz Camp. And the reason I chose her to look at was I felt like her work really had a connection to the graphic element and sort of future mural work in all of its different forms. Her drawings, of which she made over 2,000, connect to comic books, connect to satire, connects to Japanese manga work. And so they have this sort of narrative to them, and they were very personal. Her work showing the time at Topaz relocation was really about the everyday struggle, about the humiliation, about the hardships. And that as well, I felt like connected to the border wall work. So these are just some of the conversations that Allan and I had in his studio. I think when we think of immigration art, the mind goes to World War II art and things that were produced during that time. This is the German painter Max Beckmann. This is Departure Frankfurt, which was painted between 1932 and 1935. He was an art teacher at the Art School of Frankfurt when the Nazis dismissed him, and they actually labeled him as part of the degenerate art movement, which was sort of anti-anything modern or progressive. And he ended up fleeing to the Netherlands before he came to the United States in 1947. But I think, you know, we can really sort of see the pain in this work, and this really stands as a summation to his reaction to Nazi German rule. This is the artist Christo, who we're probably all familiar with, especially his larger wrapped installations later with his partner Jean-Claude. So we've seen the fabrics on the landscapes and the buildings. This is Package on Wheelbarrow, 1963. So Christo escaped communist Bulgaria in the late 50s, and he remained sort of in exile and stateless for a number of years before he became a United States citizen in 1973. This piece was actually made the year before he permanently relocated from Europe to New York, but it really does a great job of making tactile the experience of having that nomadic experience, and also the meaning to your personal items, both with what can you bring with you with the Japanese American relocation, and then with Border Wall, with what people choose to bring with them. I really loved this piece and found that it spoke to that immigrant experience. So we'll move and talk a little bit about some contemporary art that's being made in reaction to or inspired by the Border Wall. This is Teeter Totter Wall by Frantello and Real. This was probably seen or well known. It was 10 years of planning, and it was a temporary installation of these bright pink seesaws that were inserted into slots in the US-Mexico wall border. And I think that it's both the color and the object and the whimsy of the materials that sort of de-escalates the aggressive nature of the wall and what the wall does to the landscape. Real later published a book in 2017 called The Border Wall is Architecture, in which he expands the concept of the installation further. This is the mural of Brotherhood by Enrique Chu. He labels himself as a painter, a social activist, a motivational speaker, and he is hoping to go forward sort of in the tradition of great Mexican muralists such as Diego Rivera. But his goal is really to have a mural by the people, for the people. So this is something that at this point over 2,600 volunteers have worked on, and it's meant to be a community project and meant to hold, as he says, messages of hope. He really sees art as an expression for being, and his goal is to have people see the mural as they go back and forth or as they attempt to enter the United States and see these messages of hope. Sometimes they're large in scale, and sometimes the people and the painters that write, they're very tiny and they're smaller, more personal messages. But his goal is to have this be the largest mural in the world. So it's current and it's ongoing. Stefan Falk founded in 2008 something called the La Frontera Project. And it's comprised of over 200 artists from all mediums, from both the Mexican and the American side of the wall, who are all dealing with issues that relate to immigration and relate to the wall. This is Ana Teresa Fernandez, and this is Erasing the Border, 2011. So she describes the wall as being a place of both militarization and optimism. And her goal is to provide a bit of transparency and a bit of hope and humanism. So she goes to the wall and she paints with paint that she tries to mimic the sky in order to sort of make it translucent and to sort of de-escalate what the structure is. The slide on the left of her holding the paint sample, which is Bear's, it's called Seashore Dream, I thought was particularly poignant. And when you see it especially pulled back, it does sort of achieve that goal of questioning the wall, what is the wall, and making the structure something hopeful instead of something opposing or just oppressive. This is American artist Tom Kiefer. And what he did was he took a job as a janitor on the Mexican United States wall. And he began collecting things out of the dumpster that were discarded and thrown away by Border Patrol agents. And he found that these objects started to have repetition and also started to tell their own story and present their own narrative. So he speaks to specifically the rosaries and the Bibles he would find. And in the beginning, he talks about how these were items that were really sort of too precious to be discarded. And that was the beginning of his collection. And so then he builds up these items and photographs them in a way that on one hand, when you look at this work, there's a connection to pop art almost, the almost Warhol-like sort of cataloging of the cans of tuna. But when you notice that they're personal items and that each one of these confiscated items represents a human being, they really have an impactful nature, particularly the diptych on the top, which was makeup that was confiscated or discarded and laid out on this craft paper to be photographed. But then when you took away the items, it left this residue on the paper, which I feel is even more sort of charged emotionally than the items itself. They also represent that transitory nature of the people just trying to get through and of the items. It's very a ghostly image. Tanya Aguiner, this is Border Keeper. These are strings of nylon that she takes to the border, and they're from her own culture, a sort of ancient form of timekeeping and record keeping. So she hands one out to each person attempting to cross the border, and she asks them sometimes to add a message of hope, and she also details where on the border each one of these threads was found. So when you see these items all woven and strung up together, they really have quite a large impactful feel. It really makes a tactile representation of each life as they try to cross the border. Carlito Espinoza, this is called Curator. These are bricks that he makes in his studio. What he did was find out the latitude and longitude of people that were trying to cross the border, but that sadly didn't succeed. And so where the bodies lay, he would go to that area and collect sand from that place and take the sand back to his studio, mix it with cement and cord, and create these bricks. The installation is laid out in a way that's cordoned off, and you're meant to walk on these bricks to the end in order to see the label on the wall that explains the making of the bricks and what they're comprised of. So it forces you to have this tactile experience when you realize that you have actually walked on the surface that people had walked on that were trying to cross the border, and is a very emotional installation. This is Raquel Roning. She's a photographer and peace activist. This piece is from the La Frontera project, and these photographs were actually taken by the founder, Stefan Falk. But she sees this as an entire performance piece where she has made a binational flag and sewn it together and taken it to the border. And so she presents it and stands in front of the border wall with this symbol of unity and confronts the wall in that way. So what we have is the photograph to sort of remember the event and remember her ritual of doing this. But she really wants to speak to the place and the people who live between those areas of the border wall and between those two lands. Monica Lanzano is a contemporary photographer. This piece is called What Remains, and it's made up of multiple diptychs. And on the left is always the vessel or the container of whatever the people that were carrying their personal items were in. And then on the right is the actual items. And she speaks of the connection when thinking about this series to 17th century Dutch still life with that sober Black background, sort of eradicating any form of narrative that you would bring to it. So you're really presented these items in almost a forensic way. She also details the biography of the people that were attempting to cross the border and what happened and where they are now and what their situation is. And again, just like the Christo piece with the wheelbarrow, and just like the Japanese Americans waiting, sitting, holding all the items that they have, to take with them, these personal possessions really end up being an autobiography as much as a face would be. So we're going to pivot a little bit and just lead up to mural making. Some of sort of the more recent and modern reference to murals would be the Northern Iron murals from the Troubles, and the placement of these all over Belfast and Derry. So these have connection to graffiti art and street art, but they're really very well executed, and they have a perspective, obviously, that they're really speaking to in terms of political and religious divisions. Over 2,000 murals have been documented since the 1970s that would be these Trouble murals. In Belfast, currently, they're thought to be about 300 quality murals. So this is really an example of the mural as political propaganda and used as a tool sort of for the first time in this way. Similarly, this is by the street artist Sid, and this is on the Cyprus-Greek border. And all of his work is mostly this kind of graffiti art. Sometimes it utilizes stencil art as well, but it has that same sort of theme as some of the border wall images. And he speaks about how the wall is consistently being updated with new pieces. So each time you visit, each time you walk by, it's something new. It's meant to be something that you look at that's ever evolving, ever changing. And he really feels like the street art is a way for to present art that everyone is able to see, that it's free, that it's there for everyone. I think when we think about mural art, political art, of course, the thing we almost reference is the Berlin Wall. These are photographs by Thomas Urban. And the Berlin Wall is, something that's sort of iconic, and it was sort of a pastiche of, different tags, different writing, different messages, and really kind of an icon of this type of mark making that's both personal and political. This leads us into Allan and some of his work. This is Berlin Wall 1 and 2. And it's not surprising, I was not surprised when Allan led me downstairs to his studio to show me these. They were made larger size and were sort of mural printed and mounted on board. But when you look at them, you can see his love of abstraction. There's a tie to graphic art and color and symbol and emblem. It reflects something almost that you might see walking down the street in Manhattan, where you have wheat paste and advertising and slap art and tags. They almost look like Jasper John's painting. So I really feel like the Berlin Wall images were the segue for Allan for this border wall series. When I was first in the studio with Allan going through border wall, one of the things that he was really connected to with the series is the impactfulness of the color. He loved this image in particular, and the way that the color would sort of draw you in to the series and would make you really sit up and pay attention. The suite that was selected for the Katzen show was meant to be presented in a very large mural form, so that you would feel as if you were at the border wall. But one thing I think is really interesting to notice about the work is, although your eye might be drawn in first by the color and composition, you have this, like, he was sure to leave in this twirling razor wire. So it really adds to that narrative and what's really happening on the wall and with the wall. He referred to this one as an angel. So whenever I see this one, I always think of it as an angel. So the graphic quality, again, I think is one thing that is interesting. You have this similar mix of artistry of different artists and different people coming through, just like the Sid street art in Cyprus. So it's something that is evolving and ever changing as well. One of the things that Allan spoke to repeatedly when looking at this work were these little holes that were cut into the border wall, these little squares. And you can see it's to the left of the bird's head right here. And he kept saying, look how blue the sky is. And this feeling that, you know, regardless of whether they were put there for airflow or for structure, they really provided this little window where you were looking through and telescopically, you know, peering at the life that you could have or that you might have. It was a little slice of hope or of what could be is really how Allan saw those little squares. I think the success of the Border Wall series is really his eye. In the catalog, there are a couple of items that he photographed that have a long sort of history of abstraction. And so you can see his love of abstraction and of line. But I think that sort of led well into the Border Wall series in the way that he framed these and presented them. So you notice with most of them, there's not a lot of extraneous information. So when you look at one of the stills from Border Wall, you are presented with an image. It is as if you are standing in front of the border wall. So you are having the experience of seeing these things as if you are there. And I think that's really owed to Allan's eye and the way that he framed them. And so it sort of gives you that experience and puts you in the shoes of the other. And, you know, what if this was your experience? And I think also speaks to Allan's connection to the work as a self-called dreamer himself. And you can really see that he connected with these murals and connected with the work in quite a beautiful way. I'd like to introduce David Henry Gerson, who is Allan's son, and invite him to join the conversation about Border Wall and about his father as a photographer. Hi.
Hi. That was really an amazing talk. I was not expecting that.
Oh, okay.
It was really beautiful to see his work in that context. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. I thought maybe you would want to, you are sitting in Allan's studio, which is a beautiful place that we've all spent a lot of time with Allan and surrounded by some of his work and some of the work that I was speaking to at the end in the abstraction work. And I thought maybe, you know, you would like to speak a little bit more on the personal side about your father as a photographer. You know, what you witnessed, what was that like coming from your side?
Sure. I guess I would say, first off, he would be so thrilled that we can invite all of you into his studio, because there was nothing he liked more than someone coming over and him saying, come look at my work.
Yeah.
And as you can kind of see behind me, maybe it looks messier than it really is, there was quite a lot of work. And actually, Jennifer, you've been very helpful in sorting through some of these really thousands of prints. Now I've got a few in front of me here, and these are kind of like the images that I grew up with. And this is one that was sort of a key image that he took of the inside of the Musée d'Orsay clock in Paris. And I guess sort of what you've pointed to and what I'm sort of realizing is he was always photographed. It was kind of a joke that whenever we went on a walk as a family, we would have to say, where's Allan? And he would easily be 10, 100, a mile you know, behind us, taking pictures. And he had a saying that he wrote often in poetry that he did, a saying that it was his daily fix to find sort of beauty in the world and to always be looking for design everywhere. And I think in the way that he was framing the compositions of the border wall, was also sort of looking for his way of chopping up space to make his own meaning. You pointed it out earlier, but I've got a prop that he also loved to show, which is his UN rations card.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's sort of between that and then here I have also that he also loved his Justice Department ID. You know, here was a guy who sort of grew up with these stories about justice, and his parents were Holocaust survivors. Sort of always looking for justice and truth and meaning everywhere, and certainly in the law. But I think photography for him was a way to get away from sort of verbal or literal meanings and sort of, you know, legal clarities, and find more divinity and, like you said, abstraction. And so that's kind of my experience was growing up and being surrounded by his imagery. You know, like this is also of a clock that's actually on the cover of an edition of Yiddish poetry and plays, sort of like the decay of time. And I think a lot of his photographs deal with this sort of, I wouldn't say destruction, but kind of passage of time. And in a way, like an image like that, and in a lot of these border wall images, you see sort of the wall falling apart. And it's sort of what happens when these rules and systems we build start to crumble a little bit. And so I don't know how long I should be talking on here for, but I think it was always this search, you know, the search through texture and through form to find some sort of divine. Here's a picture of his, that's an older photograph of a tree. You know, he did lots of photographs of trees, but it's clearly like the eye of God is in that tree right there. And he did a huge series of like a mosque. Maybe I can take this off, but it's sort of the reflection in the water of a mosque in Casablanca. You know, he had one of his first exhibitions was called The Sacred and the Serene, which was of his photographs of the abstraction of the Sahara as well. So I guess what I'm saying here is his eye was really vast and was always looking. And I think these themes of his identity and his upbringing were things that he was searching for all the time, every day in a way.
What I found so interesting and about the Morocco, the picture that you showed, was that Allan to me was so left brain and so right brain. He had such a distinguished legal career, and was that could have been enough and was an accomplishment. But he also was such a seeker in terms of the arts. And although we're speaking about his photography today, one of the other delights of getting to know Allan and spending time with him is the other forms of art that he did. He was interested in poetry. He was interested in jewelry making. So it seemed like it was a sort of never-ending passion for him to explore these things artistically.
Here's some, he sort of invented this process of taking his photographs and printing them in silver.
Mm-hmm.
And I often remember, like just saying, sort of coming back and seeing him printing on curve. And he was always experimenting.
Yes.
In a way, it was like he was forced to become a lawyer because his parents were immigrants, but he really just wanted to be an artist. So I think especially this talk, he would have been really, really thrilled about. Here's one more photograph for you. And that's him taking a photograph, you know.
Yes.
And maybe in a way you could say that he was always looking for himself in his photography and in, you know, the work he was doing.
And would you agree that it's, you know, it seems like his early childhood experiences really imprinted on him in terms of being a seeker and you know, of justice and of equality. You know, he was particularly interested, there's something in the catalog, a quote from him where he's speaking about the dreamers and just the injustice of that. But, you know, really addressing it not only legally, but artistically, I think is really quite wonderful.
It's funny, actually, I mean, yesterday on my way down to DC, I passed by his grandparents' grave in Paramus, New Jersey. And there's a tomb that his father had put up with his mother. Both of his parents had put up, were on a committee commemorating this memorial for 12,000 who had died in the Holocaust in Zamość, Poland, the town he came from. And I remember him as a child, me as a child, him telling me, but him as a young man, having to translate from Yiddish to English for his father the words to chisel in stone on this memorial, never forget and to never forgive. And this issue of forgiveness and of how do I, as the child who was translating from my father how to chisel in stone, how do I process this legacy and this identity and really make the most of it? And he finished a memoir that should be published in the next couple of months about sort of on the legal side investigating that legacy. But I really think you're absolutely right that in his photography was trying to question, what does it mean to forgive? What does it mean to process this past? And it takes a lifetime in many ways, or generations. So I don't know. Yeah.
And I think that the Border Wall series, asks the question, what will we become? Are we going to be a nation of hope and follow the tradition of a nation that was built on immigrants? Or are we turning to a nation of xenophobia? Or, I think him presenting the border wall really opens up that question, especially in the current political climate. It's really more relevant than ever. It's very topical to what's happening now, I think, in our country.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, he was a dreamer, right? I mean, he came here as Abe Bloomstein. Found out that he was Allan Gerson when he was getting ready for his bar mitzvah, wondering, why am I not getting ready yet? And a lawyer, I believe, told him, you're Allan Gerson, you're not Abe Bloomstein. You came here on false papers. And I think, he wrote a Washington Post article that I encourage everyone to read about what does it mean to be a dreamer. And, I won't dare speak for him on politics, but I don't think he would be very pleased with the direction. Although he was, a bit of a neocon as well. And, but
artistically, what would you point to as, who inspired him? Who did he look to? What kind of work got him excited?
Yeah, well, one of the first memories I have is taking a photograph with him when I was around 10 years old in Denali National Park at a spot that Ansel Adams had taken photographs of Mount McKinley. And we often, as father and son, taking pictures together, joked about, Brett Weston and Edward Weston. And, he loved their work and the use of their light and the use of their abstraction. He loved Callahan. He really loved Paul Caponegro. He and I sort of developed it, or really, at some point we started trading books of photographers as birthday gifts. And one year I gave him the book of Mario Giacomelli's work. Sort of discovering these photographers who, his work was really, like in these clock photographs, really about abstraction and stark contrasts of blacks and whites. And so like Aaron Siskind, he was a huge fan of, and those, and these were kind of abstract expressionists as photographers that he really loved. And later on, just sort of more and more photographers as we went on in life. I think those were kind of the key black and white.
I think you see those influences, all of those influences in his work. I don't know if we want to invite Jack back, or if we would like to take some questions possibly.
Well, thank you, Jennifer and David. That was really a wonderful exchange. There have been questions being asked that we'd like maybe you to address. I have a quick question. It's a technical question. When I met with Allan early on and we started talking about creating these wall-sized prints for the exhibition, I mean, one of the reasons we started talking about it was because we could make wall-sized prints. And I'm wondering if there's a technical reason for why these prints are able to hold their detail and their clarity blown up to, 10 by 12 feet or something. I mean, it's really quite amazing. Is there something you could share about his process that made that possible?
Yes. I think it's funny. It was a conversation I was recently having with someone else that it has to do with the tools. It always has to do with the image maker and the person utilizing the tools, that they know how to use them. But he was shooting a very high quality digital camera that the capture really has just so many pixels to it. And so you really get that. You can see, from the files, I would guess that he was using a lower ISO. So he was having a really rich color palette for his work. But then also the quality of the tool he was using allows for it to be printed very large. And that's the one thing that I will miss from this presentation is I feel like, speaking at the end about how they were meant to be mural size, and speaking with Allan about how he wanted you to feel as you were standing in front of it, I think that would have been really beautiful. But he knew what he was doing. He chose the right tools for the job of border wall.
Thank you. We have another question about Allan's decision to avoid showing passersby in his mural photographs. Was his feeling that a person in the image would take away from the image or message? A focus on places rather than people is common in all of his work. That's true. I mean, you rarely see people in his work. What do you think about that question?
Well, I'm with him on that. I think that was one of the things that connected our work. But maybe David could speak more, because I know that he was with him for at least one of those walks when he was taking pictures, or maybe knows a little bit about the background of that.
I'd like to say that there is a much greater reason, but having been there for a lot of these shoots, I just don't think there were many people on those streets early that morning that we were taking these pictures. On the other hand, though, I've got a picture here that's similar that I just happen to have open, which is of Nelson Mandela's prison grounds. And again, there's nobody there. And, a lot of his photography really doesn't have people in it. A lot of it's really abstraction. I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, maybe one philosophy would be that it's kind of when people are gone, and sort of people kind of lose the abstraction.
Go ahead. I was going to say, you don't see people, but there's so often the resonance of people. One of the images in the Border Wall catalog is this beautiful part of a mural where it's parents that are holding their children's hands as they're running and trying to cross the border. And so while we don't actually see the human figure in the border wall photographs, they're always present to me. I feel like within the images, you do see resonance of human life, of human emotion. I think it's there in the border wall series.
Something that's also there often in his photographs is text in the walls, and yeah, particularly the walls. Do you know what the role of the text would be in this border wall series?
The text, I mean, there's one that says liberty, which is really striking as well. There's another beautiful color one that says Mexico. I think it also ties to what he was photographing, the history of graffiti art, a tag versus a piece versus a stencil. It's all part of that sort of culture of that post-graffiti art making world. And so I think it ties in very well. It has, it's another avenue to have a message, but it's also a graphic quality the same way that you might have a little smidge of text or a little bit of writing in a multimedia piece. And it's really is or isn't, it doesn't have to be about the word per se. It's about the overall, I think, presentation of the piece.
And I think I would just add that a lot of the times in a lot of his work, you see words here or there, to exist, God, things are like this one here that says deal or no. But it's sort of just how he was kind of repurposing what is seen out in the world. And again, if you think of it as he's looking for signs, there's some sort of divine process of what he's looking for. It's like you see these little messages, and by him cropping a word halfway, it becomes another word, and sort of a play in that way.
One of the things I'm glad that, David, you ended up in the studio is I think we miss out a lot in, Allan had a lot of whimsy and humor in his work as well. And I think you can see that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You ever wonder where? Mm-hmm. I think he's sort of playing around in almost poetic word games, which was another thing he loved. He loved word games. And, he was one of the greatest unknown Jewish rappers we've ever met. He could always beautiful poetry and rap. And so I think a lot of the words here and there is this kind of wordplay that he loved.
He was ahead of his time.
It is, it's really kind of tragic that we'll never know where his photography would have gone from here. One of the things that Edward Keating talks about in his catalog essay mentioned that he felt that Instagram was a game changer for Allan. Can you expand on that? What did Instagram mean for Allan?
Well, like I say, human beings being invited up into his studio would have been his greatest joy. So Instagram was a digital studio that anyone could come into, and he could be trying things too. Does this work? One thing that Ed is a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, would always sort of gripe about the fact that Allan would post 3 versions of the same picture. But that was his way of testing. Well, what do people respond to? What do people like? And it was a way for, I think, him to document. And I know for me as a son, it's been a real delight to have his Instagram photographs at Allan Gerson to look through from time to time, and sort of as a way to remember him. Obviously, we've got the physical form of photographs, but it's kind of like a journal of photography.
I really admired that we coincided right when he was sort of starting Instagram. And so he was talking to me about it, and he said, well, I'm going to do this, and I'm really excited about it. And I really loved the fact that he embraced it as a platform and was so passionate about it. We were following each other, and it would come up in my feed, all the time, images once he started. And I thought that was so great. I really loved that he embraced it so wholeheartedly.
Here's an interesting question. Since these are photographs of murals, what does it mean to only view part of a whole? What part of the experience is lost by viewing them as photographs? Or maybe you could change that to what part is gained by viewing them only as photographs?
Well, I think it's, when I was speaking about compositionally with Border Wall, how I find them to be a success because of the way that they're edited, how it immerses the viewer in the experience that wouldn't be the same as if you were pulled back. And I did go through the raw files with Allan, and there were ones where he was walking, getting closer and getting closer. And they read more as sort of street scenes or street art. It was a little bit different than what he presented with Border Wall. It was a little bit more photojournalist look when he had the expanse of the street. So I think we could say that with any photograph, right? Any time you take a photograph, you're making a conscious choice to fill a frame in a certain way, and you are editing every time you take a photograph. And so this is the edit that Allan wanted for us to look at the work as if we were standing there. And I always think it's important to view the work as the artist wanted you to, and with the artist's intent.
I would also just add to that, from a bratty son perspective, I often would sort of gripe with him about these photographs he would do of other people's graffitis. And I said, if you're just going to print someone else's work, well, that's copyright infringement in some capacity. But if you are really reframing their work and kind of like the wordplay, by reframing it and cropping it in and just showing one aspect, you're sort of making it your own image, your own photography, by sort of commenting also on like the textures between the work and the wall. And so I think that's part of it as well.
We're getting towards the end here. Are there any last observations or comments we could ask you to make, David or Jennifer?
I
I want to first, let me just thank you and your family and Jennifer for allowing us to do this, go ahead with this project. It really has been a great, meaningful experience for us. And I hope, and I hope has helped you guys too through an obviously difficult time.
It's been fantastic, and I'm very grateful to both of you. I really, for all of my family, but really for myself, I can speak on personally, to have this excuse to look through his work so deeply in the last few months and preparing for the catalog. And I encourage everyone to get the catalog if you can. I think you email the museum is the right way to get the catalog.
It's going to be emailed. The electronic version is going to be emailed to the participants in this webinar.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But so you can see there's some of the sort of retrospective of his work. If anyone is watching is in DC tomorrow and at a distance wants to get a print, I can leave something out on the porch for you. But there's a lot of work here, and this has been a great send-off to start celebrating the work, hopefully for a long time to come.
Good.
Yeah, and thank you to Jack, the Katzen team, and to David, who was a partner to me in going through this work. It really was turned into a labor of love, and this friendship and artistic relationship that I began with Allan. I mourn that he's not here to enjoy it as well, because he would really love it. At the night of the Shiva that I attended, at the end of everyone speaking, the family had put out just large piles of Allan's work and encouraged people to take a print like David just did with them. And I just felt that was so appropriate and in the spirit of Allan and what he would want. So thank you guys for the experience of being able to present Border Wall. And I'm so glad it made it out into the world.
Oh, I want to thank everybody for attending today. There will be an actual printed catalog, and at some point we'll actually have our museum shop open again, and you'll be able to get one. So I hope that happens soon. In the meantime, you can check our website and Museum at Home page, and you can see what other programs and exhibitions we have coming up. And I hope you'll join us again for those in the future. Thank you all.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just, there was one Instagram post of his that said the words vote.
Yeah,
Oh, very good. Okay.
absolutely.